The Myth of the Kite Bird. Since the beginning of time, he was known as the Deceiver. No man or woman dare speak his name unless his damnation from their parted lips. Dread of inviting his presence was whispered with fear, like a black cloud choking out of their mouths. Omens of his evil were gossiped by suspicious townspeople, whose warnings were clear as a death knell. His moniker, Monsieur X. The rules were easy. Never incant his name. One did not dare, for legend claims he would arise from his cavernous black hole, curl his body around loved ones, seize their souls, and leave them to roam the earth, damned and demonic. These events invited panic and prompted Parliament to pass the Witchcraft Act of 1592, codifying the murder of sorcerers, alchemists, and witches. Those suspected were disemboweled, their bodies satisfyingly burned at the stake. It was a barbaric practice, but a necessary one. Strangers were avoided, though outsiders were reluctantly permitted for breeding. There were rules about reproduction as well. Mothers were encouraged to continue producing children until the first male, the unwanted one. Women became as cattle, a commodity for the hungry hearts of procreation, and male offspring resented, reviled, and run out of town. These simple steps inoculated us from curses for thousands of years, traditions which belied our 21st century existence. Having little contact with the outside world meant technology was at a minimum, and any exposure was smuggled by shadow of the moon and under fear of murderous retribution. We were not entirely provincial, as electricity was voted acceptable and homes had washers, dryer, fridges, stoves, and even hair dryers. Mostly the townspeople fear stemmed from exposure to evils or the seduction of youth by Satanists. Therefore, anyone caught with a television, phone, or radio could be subject to being hanged, eviscerated, and burned at the stake for good measure. iPhones and computers were a necessary evil, but according to town rules, no internet, television, electronic, or radios were allowed. And us youth, we were thirsty to taste these taboos. Everyone was well read thanks to lack of distractions, though modern books were not provided because they might tilt our sensibilities and bend us to the susceptibility of Western influence. Evolution was at a snail's crawl, and most of the townspeople spoke and acted like characters created by Bronte, Woolf, Dickens, and my favorite, Bish Shelley. That's how Moses and I became to be orphans. Our parents were suspected of incanting, and likely they were guilty. We did not blame the townspeople as we saw the corruption and perversions our parents brought to the town. They were immoral, lustful, self-absorbed narcissists who forgot about their children for the taste of whiskey and the raging wild parties from the states outside of Oxford. We all feared them. They were defective. According to the townspeople, they deserved to die. But there was a perversion corroding the veneer of our safety. Small children began to disappear, and possessions were rampant. Most refused to seek help for fear of reprisal, so they hid their hauntings. I was one of those plagued with possession. Every evening, damnation was clawing at my naked body, pulling me so close to the depths of hell I could smell the rancorous stench of flesh curling, hair burning, and souls seething. Seeking solace from my nightly possession, I beseeched the council for aid, to which they instructed me to repent and beg for mercy at the podium, a red blood-stained witch's block. I was to pray for exorcism in lieu of the preferred punishment, a piranha's party of bowel stew and burned meat, me as the main course. The morning of my trial, with the threat of torture hanging over my head like Damocles' sword, I meekly step onto the stage slick with rain. The clouds smothering the sun, a mist of darkness swaddling the crowd, my jurors' eyes pitted with ire. Reconsidering my decision, I turn to leave the podium. The corpulent chairman grabs my arm aggressively, kicking the witch's block under the gallows, reminding me that it was no longer my choice. Looking over his eyebrows at the hangman's rope, he callously shoves me, stumbling into full view of the crowd. My knees shaking violently as my first foot weakly met the grainy block. I scan the crowd, catching the shifting angry eyes of my headsman, 2 bucks locking antlers. My voice wavering and clogged, I squeal out my first words. I am a young orphaned girl, yet to commit a major sin. I stop and wait for retort. I am met only with a deafening silence. I cannot read my swarming crowd of bees. I can only focus on their pulsating anticipation. Hot rushes of panic smother me. The crowd twitches restlessly. Urgency to continue pushes me like a lemming over a cliff as I stutter on. The crowd leans in. I attend church on Sunday. I have never allowed a boy to soil my virginity. With each silent stare, I can sense their coiled suspicion, my imperilment tightening under the crowd's wringing hands. I am only able to strangle out the words. Find him! Kill him! As spittle ran down my chin, just like the hysterical, ravenous animals that were deciding my fate. I had finally assimilated. I was one of them. Sadness and shame bathed me as I closed my eyes to remember Sister Lilith, the gentle nun leaning over me as a child, her fat fingers tenderly stroking my cheek, her silken white cuff dropping down, exposing a marred red scar burned on her wrist, and the whisper of a simple Latin proverb they forbade her to speak. Her hot breath sings softly into my ear. Columbae milvi me tu accipitrem, roga verunt ut eas defenderet. Out of fear of the kite bird, the doves ask the hawk to defend them. My body thunders with chills awaiting my fate. I open my eyes to suspicious screams from the crowd. Liar! An angry man with furrowed brow screams, shaking his fists furiously. What is his name? He says to me, tilting his chin up, eyes bulging like tomatoes. This was a common trick for ignorant ghouls, for if the name Monsieur X were spoken, every townsperson would sharpen their scythes and swing them madly like a bevy of drunks shoved from a closing bar. I could only see intestine-picking, corn-teeth-gnawing, bad-breath-licking, psychopathic witch-hunters, so one would do well to answer correctly. I know not his name, I say humbly. What does he look like? He screams, his lower lip hanging down, exposing his yellowed bottom teeth. Frightened, I stutter on. He is a ghostly stranger with crow-black hair, eyes tender and blue as a poisonous dart frog, skin white with a pink hue of swallowed blood bubbling under its surface, and slender piano fingers. He dons a 3-piece black suit, a crisp white shirt with long lapels, like lamb's tails hanging down. Their judgmental stares alert me that I need to narrow my attention to my huntsman and away from me. I repeat my hostile call for his termination. Please, murder my nameless tormentor. I scissor my fingers into a prayer fist. Girl, hauntings only seek out sinners. Should we suspect incantation? Yells the short, serious man with a scissor nose and round, pregnant belly. He bobs his head to the others, like someone with a burdensome inferiority complex, scouring the crowd for approval. Cornered by his accusation, I scream, Find him, or he will devour your daughters. The crowd freezes, watching for Scissor Nose's reaction. His ears grow red vines of embarrassment, and his bottom lip puckers. He is stalled to speak. The crowd continues to hang on his silence, their eyes squinting in anger, as if contemplating my barbecue. I can tell that the pause is too pregnant, and I feel desperation well within me. I turn to his waif-like daughter. She! I thrust my accusing pointer at Avivet. Her skin runs pale, bleached from the shock of my betrayal. Avivet told me he came to her first. I scream, hoping to distract attention. I narrow my eyes to her, inferring distrust. I watch the crowd's loyalty bleeding out rapidly. My insinuation seems to grow legs as they inspect Avivet. At only 15, she is too naive to counter my accusation. Her short, frail body crumples in on itself. Her mouth opens as if swallowing the moon. Her hands sling back to cover her breasts. She twitches like a nervous chick searching for her father. Terrified, she meets his gaze. He holds out his arms and she stumbles to his aid. The crowd curls onto her, Scissor Nose shrinking down over his daughter. He looks to me with a puckered scowl, as if his just deserts were bitter. I stand taller, tilting my head down at him, an imperial queen plotting his extermination. She looks up to me, a bird squawking for mother's vomit. The crowd also looks to me, cheeks puffed, panting for answers from their newest orator. The poor girl tucks under her father's burly arm, peeking up with washed-out eyes, her scarlet lids burning with salt-stained tears, a little fawn in a jackal's den, her safety dissipating with the quickness of vapor. Turning to face the crowd, I close my eyes and breathe, my breasts swell. Finally, with the courage to command coursing through me, I begin. Should we take your daughters and disembowel them, burn them at the stakes for their hauntings? Who gives their daughters first? I demand. I clench my hands to maintain my poise. Their eyes lighten. Savage, ruthless masks peel like plaster, falling to the ground. The sheep, so easily driven. Mothers urgent grab their daughters, tears frothing over their lids as if waking from a wicked trance. Fathers eye the alleyways. The crowd disperses in droves like a pack of wild dogs, dingoes ushering their children home. Relieved, I run for home as well. My only resolve is having saved Avivat from the wolves nipping at her glittery heels. I feel no victory, though I have made accomplices. He will come to haunt me anyway, I know it. My dream takes me to a field, my blanket spread wide with a large fire teeming. Eve, he hisses, his naked body rippling over my flesh, pulling my white dress from my pink naked body. I do not dare flinch for fear of reprisal. I'm frightened and stiff. I keep my blue icy eyes closed, hoping he bores, but instead of weariness, he winds up my leg and curls back over the hollow of my navel. He stops only to listen to the blood rushing to my heart, pumping its red ventricles faster and faster it throbs. He lures me with his apple cheeks, flush with ruddy patches of excitement. An innocent smirk parts his face. Abruptly, he stops and pulls away, shaking his head in disbelief. He leaps to his feet. He twists and turns, hunting an escape. I'm embarrassed as my enjoyment is teem's. I find myself lustful for his attention, yet wanting to wake from the possession. My trance-like dream interrupted by the flashing flicker of his iPhone. He's photographing me wildly. His deceitful smile exposes a fearful urgency. I reach to him. He cowers. His eyes bulge. His body recoils, and he clumsily scurries out of reach. His posture hunching in fear, terrified mouth of disclosure gaping and screaming. Madam Eve! Madam Eve! I stay in my vision. I believe it will reveal his identity. I squint, my eyes looking past him at the house tucked through the trundles of rolling thorny pink roses above the embellished arched door, and there's an inscription etched. Here stood the castle of King Richard the Lion-Hearted, known as Beaumont Place, 1157. My tormentor having fled, I wake myself and run to scrawl the address I've seen. I know where he lives, I scream. Beaumont Buildings. Slipping on my black dress, with wilting red dahlias sprinkled about the hemline, Revolution red ribbons tied about the bodice, girding my breasts and holding my weapons, I gather gasoline, matches, and my scythe and sickle. In a fervor, I run to my newly acquired allies. I beat on the door, but no one answers. I stand tiptoed on the stoop, straining and stretching my body to peek through the window. I see Avivat with her mother, father, and the youngest 5-year-old sister, Alicia. I bang again. They all look terrified, all cowering from my gaze, hands over eyes, shielding and scurrying into the dark corners of the basement like roaches in a candy factory. I crouch down, aggressively kicking at the lower window. Plexiglass! It will not budge. Let me in! I scream as I kick again. A man comes upon me like a fog, frightened. I try to make him out, my breath in labor and heart thrumming. His soulless eyes come to light in front of my face. Fear grips me. Eve, it is you. Relief spills over me like viscous honey. It's Moses from the orphanage. I place my shivering corpse-like hands onto his cheeks. He hugs me urgently and yanks my hand off his face. You must come to the witch's block, he demands, dragging me towards Circus Street. I pull out of his grip. Why? I ask, suspicion pulsing in me. Grabbing my wrist, he tightens his grip as if to snap my hollow bones. No, they have him at the witch's block, and he names you as a demon. I pause and back away. I look for a place to run. He shakes his head back and forth. No, they look to you for guidance. Suspicious, I ask, what guidance? His posture softens, and he breathes out heavily. They kindled a fire, and I believe they have found the one that haunts you, but they only trust your decisions, he rattles urgently. Why me? I lean my head to the side, looking out the corner of my eye suspiciously. Your mercy has saved an innocent girl, and they seek wisdom. Urgency seizes me as I recognize that the mob's additional time with the nameless man could expose my part in the hauntings. I slide my sickle back under the red ribbon on my bodice and grab Moses's hand. We run together, my black hair flapping behind me like a raven's wings. Reaching the center square, the townspeople are buzzing like a swarming mass of bees. Indeed, they have kindled fire, and he is there, just as Moses suggested. The man from my hauntings, hunched on the ground, injured. When I approach, his head is bowed as a sinner begging for mercy. Blood laps over his eyebrows precipitously. The crowd claps zealously, and he realizes I'm there. Exhausted, he whimpers out, pointing at me, "Madam X." Straining to raise his head, he musters the strength to scream, "Madam X," and keeps screaming, "Madam X! Madam X!" I'm startled. I wasn't expecting such a convincing plea from the injured man. Sister Lilith runs to me with the gait of a trampling walrus. Her face panicked and lips pinched. She's panting as she leans over to whisper in my ear. I exhale deeply. I nod my head. I scream out, "He is a heretic, an alchemist, probably a lawyer, and must be burned at the stake." The crowd tightens around him, and Sister Lilith leaves me to run up behind him. Pushing past the mob, she shoves her purple silk handkerchief into his mouth. She moves down and ties his hands behind him. She leans on the witch's stump, puts the noose around his neck, and slips the knot. The crowd is silent, interrupted by St. Peter's bell ringing 3 times, the witching hour beginning. Ooh! The sound of ominous confirmation rings in unison from the mob, a band of young children on a roller coaster. "Stop! He is innocent!" A tiny helium voice whimpers from Alicia. Loud whispers begin to hum from the crowd like a symphony of disbelief. Doubt grips the crowd as they look around in confusion, begging for guidance. I am compelled to keep control. I must prevail. "He's corrupted her!" I scream in retort. I run on stage, kicking the witch's block from under his feet. The echo of the gallows creaks for miles, and his body flings to and fro, twitching. His neck is limp, hanging to the side like a rotten piece of meat, leaving a meat grinder. The small girl, with chocolate curls, slaps both hands to her face, screeching, "No!" She runs to him, convulsing in tears, clutching the bottom of his feet. The crowd begins mounting their anger at me, screaming of fiendish inhumanity. "He was innocent," Alicia repeats. Her brave, beady eyes are cold and offensive, at battle with fear. "Madam X!" she screeches as if fleeing banshees escape her mouth. "Don't say it, Alicia!" Sarah, the child's godmother, screams. The town, in panic, reeling from the forbidden utterance, descends on the 5-year-old. Sarah runs in front of the girl, protective arms stretched like a crucifix, shunning away the mob. "She said madam! She said madam!" Sarah screams. "She didn't mean it! It's not his name!" she cried. "This is little Alicia," she pleads, still swatting at the angry mob, goose-stepping toward the fragile child. Alicia's mother runs over, clapping her thin fingers like tentacles over the child's mouth. The crowd looms closer, pulling at the mother's dress where the small child is draped in the folds. "She is a witch! She said the name!" Sister Lilith screams. I watch the crowd as they brutally snatch at the slight girl from under the mother's shield. With her left arm fixed around the girl, the mother holds her right hand up weakly. Bowing her head down, she pleads to speak. "Please," she whimpers. "Wait!" Her voice like a dulcet violin crying. They stop in their tracks. The mother looks up astonished, the voice of reasoning biting the crowd. a bump of empathy swelling. Seeking reprieve from the bloodthirsty crowd, she waves her right hand forward 3 times as if to tame the mob. "She is a baby. Please think about your babies." The crowd's posture loosens. Many lower their weapons, looking up through eyebrows of shame, bowing their heads in obeisance. I approach the child gingerly, but she shakes a small Bible at me. "Madam X!" the child screams again. The crowd flinches, grasping their mouths in horror. I grab the little girl by the arm. She squirms. Mother loses grip on her legs as I pull her away. I turn back to see the townspeople beating the mother into submission. Not knowing what this girl might be possessed with, I hold her up by a tuft of her thin white eyelet dress, her tiny pink patent leather boots dangling and thrashing away. She jerks wildly, slashing me with razor nails as I drag her to the witch's stump. Sister Lilith unfurls the unnamed man, letting his body fall with a violent thump to the ground, holding the noose expectantly. Alicia reaches down, squealing like a sow, to her defenseless wailing mother, whose arms are hog-tied behind her back. I place the girl on the witch's stump, holding her head in place. Sister Lilith nooses her neck, and an odd calmness washes over her. Her squirming ceases, finally conceding to death. "Oh!" an orchestra of judges utter the confirmation of her wickedness. "May I read a passage from the Bible?" she asks, her voice shaking. She strokes the Bible protectively, and her small hands quiver so violently the book nearly bobs from her grip. "Let her read!" the godmother yells out. As if on cue, the small girl pouts her milky eyes to the crowd, tilting her head to the side, enunciating her innocence. I was impatient with this trickery. Demons and devils use wiles and cunning hidden behind virtuous tears all the time, but the crowd's empathetic swollen eyes fix to the mother. She returns their sympathy, weeping desperately, imploring them for a lenience while clasping her hands in prayer. The daughter also begs and pleads savagely, stealing the hearts of onlookers. The mob grows restless and insists I acquiesce to the child's appeal to read the Bible. A young girl of 16, piously dressed, hair pulled into 2 braids, reaches her hand sympathetically to the 5-year-old. "Let her go." Her soft voice cracks and pleads as she touches the girl. A few other voices join the empathetic whining, the crowd's decision overpowered by compassion. My only choice is to allow it. Killing young ones is always emotional for onlookers. Opening the tiny book, her eyes dart back and forth in confusion. Her face furrows in panic. "Go on, girl," Sister Lilith yells impatiently, poking the girl's chest, prodding her insistently. The crowd yells with stampeding voices, agitated by Sister Lilith's roughness. "All right, enough," I say as I grab the child's wrist and take away the Bible. "No, let her read," someone screams from behind me, their voice more forceful than the last cynic. "Step aside, let her read," they demand again. I wave Sister Lilith to step aside, and we back off to give breath to their anger. The book shakes in the child's hand, but she points to the middle with her small nimble finger as if sermonizing. Abruptly, a bellowing sound comes out of the Bible, jarring the crowd. Time stands still as I grapple with controlling my reaction. She plays something for them. A melody. Hypnotic. I step closer, urgent to grab the Bible from her petite hand. She pulls away from my grip like an aggressive little bantam, flipping her worn little Bible toward the crowd, arms stretched like pogo sticks, a running video in full view. The volume up, full amps, the sound of music imbued with an ominous beating of a raging drum. A spellbinding song spills from the iPhone sandwiched in the spine of the Bible. The crowd moves closer, squinting to see more, mouths open as if to catch flies. Playing on the screen a video of Sister Lilith and I naked, circling a blue furious fire, incanting in the woods with a frightened man crying as we eviscerate him to the beat of our incantation, taking his soul with orgiastic excitement. The video shifts, crumpling noises hissing. Across the field a handsome man in a black suit and long white lamb's wool lapels videos us with his iPhone. I watch myself reach out, calling him as he runs to Beaumont Buildings. "I put a spell on you," our incantation hums in the background of the video. Denial bubbling, I tilt my head and blink. Even with my innocent mask crumbling, I breathe and whisper, "Space ultima parrot." Hope dies last. The video continues to run. A murderous stain of evidence bleeds into the eyes of the mob. They rumble like a swarm of locusts frothing under the swaying grass, anger piercing their thin veil of silence. Compelled by their bulging eyes, I reach to the white lamb, a tiny girl, Alicia. Leaning away from me, her eyes narrowing, she screams, "No!" The crowd, agitated by my attempt, creep up the platform wall. Sister Lilith looks at me, and I nod my head. She nods back, a tacit treaty, and kicks the witch's stump from under the little girl. The swarm gasps as they run at us, swinging their scythes and sickles.